I'm always fascinated to hear what people have to say about it. We debated a lot about the ending, and ultimately decided to go somewhere obviously ambiguous. And depending, we've screened it a fair bit, and it's a kind of ending where people that want to believe he has a chance tend to believe he has a chance. And the fact that there's obviously a moment of acceptance of a shadow he sees on the wall and what's been following him versus his own realization of what is actually gone on. And I think if you want to believe that he'll be all right, I think you can. And I think if you dig dark endings and realize this kid never had a shot, you believe that. And we didn't want to be definitive in that way about which way you want to interpret it.
It's sometimes a challenge to the audience because we're so used to being given that. But I don't think we're really given anything we want a lot of times in this film. Spielberg children's movies, it's like, whoa, isn't an alien going to save them or something? Like, can't they fly on bikes? That'd be so much happier. Really a fascinating choice to make that, too, because I could kind of feel it coming, and I was like, I'm not sure where this is going to end up. And then as soon as it ended, I was like, okay, all right, it's on me, I guess.
To a certain extent, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
which is not always easy, I know.
No, it's not. But I think it's a bold move. That's for sure. And I think sometimes too, it's a great thing that probably it'll create a lot of conversation following this film.
But I mean, I think to leave people with conversation is good. Believe me, we debated it up and down a million times and had versions. But I think we landed at a place where there was nothing definitive to say at the end of the film. I mean, his father's obviously dead. Depending on how you interpret what Alfreda does at the end of the film there with their bloody hand and putting it on the scissors, I mean, that to us is a very sacrificial move, because depending on how what you depict and what you interpret from the scene that goes on while he blocks his ears, three of them in a tussle, somebody gets stabbed. The director answered this question a couple weeks ago, and it was a tough one for people. You know what it was? It was we actually looked through a bunch of period Canadian money. Yeah, and he ultimately he wanted the film to have a very timeless feel, and as much as I totally get the American things some people have bumped on, he felt like American bills they haven't changed in so many years. It was the kind of thing you could put in that didn't place it in a dated time, and it could have a kind of a classic feel, and the options for us at that point were colored money, and he felt off about it. Gosh, yeah, the American was very deliberate, and it was a tricky choice, but I don't think the cigarette covers were. So bravo, my dear.
Yeah, it's funny because you sound like that idea of saying like you wanted to have this timeless feel. Like in watching it, I kind of almost felt like there's this kind of almost like late 70s aesthetic in some ways. But I think that's because you weren't seeing anything overtly modern in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of like that about it, and I was trying to pinpoint exactly maybe where it was meant to be if it was more about...
I think if you were to date it, Christian would probably say it's like early 90s, and the trucks were sort of circa 80s kind of vibe. I mean, there's one of the only overt references to time is he mentioned something about tapes. When they're catching rabbits, and she asks, is there going to be a band at the dance? He says, no, they're playing tapes. And she said, oh, what's the world coming to? So that, if you listen and catch that, I think that's like, he was going sort of early 90s, but was totally okay with it being something kind of broad. And I mean, if you look at Jude's wardrobe, he's obviously a poor kid, so he wears a lot of the same things over and over again. And it was a lot of outfits that you could have a kid in now, or you could have a kid in 30 years ago. And that was a lot of the intention. But I think Joel's tattoos are something of a tell too, because they are more random. And we wanted to know that you wanted to see that he was tattooed, but we were careful to try to not showcase all of them, because a lot of them were, recent. It's the best conversation we've had about this is the chat that you hope people have in private, but let's do it, guys. We're here.
Yeah, let's do it together.
No, totally. I mean, again, I guess I think it's great that some people hate it and some people love it. Honest to God, I mean, it was something to kind of reiterate, debated so heartily from the first draft of the script all the way. I'll be honest, the ending was a reshoot a few months later too, partly because we needed to pick up some things, and partly because we were still debating. I don't know where else to leave this film, really. I mean, the kid has nothing left, and in ways, we never call this film a coming-of-age film, but in a lot of ways it is for the boy. And that's like, usually most coming-of-age films, we have the character realization, and then we have a resolution where we get to see how it applies to their life after they learn. I don't know what this kid's life looks like now. So we were really into the idea of ending the film at that moment of realization where he gets it, and you realize he gets it, and now you have no idea what he's going to do with it because he's used his entire life to escape the bad in his life, his imagination, and it's a moment of realizing that he's staring at himself, and that's all he has, and he committed a murder and all these types of things. I don't know what he's going to do with it, and I don't think we ever wanted to say what he was going to do, and I think that's the idea of leaving that to you guys to decide what you want for him, because I don't know what life looks like for him when he turns out of the cave. There you go. Sequels, guys. Franchise. Thank you.
This thing screams franchise.
Absolutely. If they can do it with Batman movies,
Oh,
I don't
yeah,
know why.
for sure. There should be 10 of these, probably.
We just add an S on the end of it and then cast my shadows, which people have been calling it mistakenly a few times. I'm not Joel, but I'll do my best. I mean, he's a Newfoundland born and raised fellow. He's been an artist for most of his life. He's published a handful of books. They're really good. He's just one of those. It's Canada's a big place, and if you mention his name on the East Coast, people will know him really well. And to be honest, he never got into how true to his life, especially when it came to a lot of the abuse type stuff. But I know he has rough relationships from back in the day, and he's got a lot of young main characters. This was actually based on Say Nothing Saw Wood, was a collection of short stories that he wrote, and it was different stories all following the same kid at the same age, which he was honest about was in a large part based on him. But beyond that, he'll talk about it sometimes, but you don't get into too much of the nitty-gritty, and you kind of don't ask. But I know having Percy play, his real son play, was, I think, brilliant. I mean, I think the award's fantastic, and he won one at the Atlantic Film Fest, too. He's a brilliant kid. That was shooting the abuse scenes and things like that was really emotional, but actually more so for everybody else more than them, because it was like the fifth week of end of the shoot. Everybody was in love with the two of them, and we were making their film and so excited, and it was just, I think it was tough for Joel to turn that around, but how kind of cathartic as well to be doing that with your own, you know what I mean, and in a film that's yours. And I think he's really proud of how it all turned out. So it was a special thing for sure.
So I mean, what kind of drew you to the project in the first place? So what was it about the story or that really attracted you?
Well, this was I initially was attracted to Christian Sparks, the director. We went through the Canadian Film Center together in Toronto, where I met him in 2011, and we really wanted to do a film together. We really wanted to do his first feature-length film. And then he brought Joel, but he had actually just, out of the blue one day, said, I'm going to send you this collection of short stories. I want you to read it. I'm not going to tell you why. Just read it. And I read all the stories, and they were all these really kind of vignette-y little bits of one night in the summer, Jude went and did this with Ricky there. And the next one would be, you don't know if it was tomorrow or 3 months later over there. Really interesting. You kind of couldn't find what the link was. And Christian said, I see how it's going to go. We're going to do it this way, and we're going to bring a troll into it. There's no troll in the stories, but I want a troll. Like, okay, and heard that whole story. And I thought he had a great pitch on the movie, but it was Joel's writing, and he wanted Joel to write the screenplay. He kind of knew Joel in Newfoundland. And I remember saying to him that if Joel bites on this, I'm totally in. I think it's brilliant. Good luck getting a writer to mash up all of his stories and bring a magical creature into it. And Joel was kind of admittedly had a hard time cracking how to make it into one. Like, he loved the short stories, but wanted to do something with them, didn't know how to link them into like a narrative, through line, and also was really interested in introducing fantasy to his work. So it was like a totally lucky thing that at that point in time he didn't, he was ready to do exactly what Christian wanted to do. And it was a great pitch. And as soon as that happened, he had a first draft, I think a month later, and it was great. It was the best first draft I ever read. And honestly, we were off to the races. We're here, funny enough, it's late September, sorry.
Yeah, we're almost there.
I first met about this project in September 2012. This is when Christian had the pitch for Joel. A year later, we were shooting the film financed, and a year later, we're screening it. It's insane.
Yeah.
But in large part, a huge credit to Joel, because he'd done the short stories and had, all the world was figured out, the characters, he knew the world so well that once he cracked the outline and how to make it into a feature, it was like clockwork. It was unbelievable how fast he pulled it together.
It may not seem like a quick turnaround, but the reality is it is.
Yeah, 2 years is a really long time, but for a movie, it's not at all. We're lucky, and I almost don't think we don't want to do it that way again, because we're kind of like, we can't get away with that again. Like, there's, they're supposed to take longer.
You never know. Lightning could strike twice.
Yeah, there you go.
Questions about Joel's ending?
Yeah, no, great question. He always went to the cave. I will say there was never an ending that was wildly different than this. He always went to the cave at the end. It was always going to be confronting whatever that was for Jude. I think we just had very different variations on how Jude took that and what he realized. And they weren't always quite as visual, but we actually, through conversation, whether it was dialogue, trying to talk to a troll that wasn't there, or whatever it was. We ended up landing on this, which is a lot quieter of an ending, but was something very visual, a very visual realization. But it was never very different. It just was debating what the note was. And I think Joel would probably say the same thing about standing behind what we did, was just that, like, I don't know where this kid goes yet. So we wanted to leave it there. I think just what exact note we ended it on was what we kind of continually tweaked for months, honestly. I'll get more into the first part and the second part. I think the second part will bore people somewhat, so we'll have that conversation.
We can talk later.
But no, it's just because it's, you know, it's funny business stuff. But so he's absolutely right. It was a pilot program. Telefilm Canada, you've probably seen them at the front of a lot of films over the last several decades. They're sort of our main federal financer through the government of Canada. But this was a new program, and this was actually the first time that they not only gave this small amount of money, but they gave it out to more people and did it as a totally grant-based, we're giving you the money to go make the movie, first-time filmmakers only, and they literally wanted to leave you alone and see what you came up with. So I think the short answer, it was like the process of doing that was actually terrific, because we were left to go, and one of my dear friends, Katrina's in the house and was out making the movie with us all the way from Edmonton, and she'll know it was like 20 or 25 of us in really random, dicey spots around Newfoundland with a really small unit and team doing our movie. And I just kind of feel like, had we had more oversight, we would never have been able to make it as ambitiously. And I think everybody, you know, we had a young crew. Everybody was so game to be in Newfoundland. Whether they were from Newfoundland or not, they were pumped to be where they were, doing what they were, seeing incredible things every day and making a really cool film. So the lack of oversight was great. And I'd say, like, budget-wise, is wildly ambitious for its budget. And, like, everybody, we're always pushing it. But this one particular, we've been telling some people it's a micro-budget film, and they're like, their mind's blown. But I think we would have... could have used a little more money or a lot more money. Because I think if it fell in the... I'm not going to tell you. If you look at Telefilm micro budget, you can see quickly what they're capped at. It's small. We were at the higher end of...
I feel like the word micro is a pretty good indicator.
Yeah, it's tiny. And I'll say, like, a lot of Canadian films are made at a higher budget than ours, admittedly, you know, in the, like, just under $1 million or just over $1 million kind of zone. And I know I've worked on a lot of those types of movies, and we would have died if we made that kind of movie. We would have had fewer days. We would have been too big to be as mobile as we were, but not big enough with enough money to buy the time and resources we actually needed. So we were lucky to be in this, like, smaller zone where we had a lot of freedom. It was next to impossible some days, but because no one was watching and it was like the right age and right attitude for everybody at that level, it was possible to do it. And so I'd say generally fantastic, even though I have more gray now than I've ever had, but I think exponentially more since September 2013. It's a great dialogue to get into. We're the first round, and we're just screening now. So I think the release will be the ultimate teller for all of our films. And there's, you know, it's kind of cool too, because they gave them out regionally all over the country. So there's The Valley Below was that the Edmonton-based film or Calgary? I played at TIFF recently. I mean, that is doing really well. And I live with another guy who had another one of the 8 through Winnipeg. So, you know, we're kind of all feeling it out and seeing where it goes. But it's where they're going to be distributed. And I think, you know, to talk about ours, I think we'll end up out early next year. And we played the distribution game somewhat, but we're actually going to be probably self-releasing theatrically with a pretty cool digital component to it. And still on pay TV and all that kind of stuff. But we've sold all that ourselves and just basically said, you know what? The distributors are looking at these as small movies, and it's hard enough for a $1 or $2 million Canadian movie to get a decent distribution deal and get out to theaters for more than a weekend. So if that's our fate anyway, we'd rather control it and focus where we're going. So that's kind of the short answer to what's going to happen with the film, but we'll have more chats, my friend. We were based in St. John's, so that's on the east side of the most populated place. But within about an hour radius of there, we got around a lot. I pretty much covered almost every piece of land in and around the radius, probably about an hour. We were in 39 different places in 23 days, which was also a killer. But I think it's the visual variety that's in the film comes from that. We bounced around a lot. We were all the way out to Brigus, which is sort of inland. We never went out to the other coast. We talked about it, but it's, you know, at one point we were talking about doing the film on a place called Fogo Island, which is gorgeous, but Newfoundland itself is an island, and even when you're in St. John's, you really know you're on an island, and you have to ferry all your equipment in already. And then the idea of going to an island off an island 2 ferries away from Halifax just seemed insane. So we were mostly, you know, St. John's were kind of our roots, and then we splintered off from there.
Yeah, and I think, how beautifully stark the landscape is really kind of complements the story itself, too.
I think so,
in so many different ways.
Yeah, the East Coast is I'm from Ontario, admittedly, which I don't always admit, depending where I am. But I got to go. I mean, I'm now kind of somewhat of an honorary Newfoundlander. I've been out there a million times since now, and we're working out there a lot. And it's a really magical place, and it's also a really hard place in its ways. And I mean, I think this story, from what I've seen, there's so many outports they call them outport towns, where everybody used to fish cod for a living until there was a moratorium on cod because they overfished it, and I've been this year, and there's still remnants, now more than 20 years after that, of people in these towns where they were devoted to fishing, and then the fishing went away. And huge public subsidies, and people, who have nothing to do and are in these parts, they drink, they, just survive. And this story is not unlike, I think, a lot of young folks, what they deal with in that province. I think that idea of starting to face, whatever you think he sees in that shadow, that's absolutely the intention. There's a beginning of an understanding of something, and the rest will be in the franchise. So
yeah, well, and that's a really difficult thing to broach, and if you want to be honest about it, sometimes it doesn't get erased as easily as maybe other people may think.
Sure.
And the script took it head on, basically. A lot of choices that the character makes, but also as well as the things that happen around them in their lives. And they're not things necessarily that we always want to, admit that happen, but unfortunately they do a lot.
Yeah.
So I like that it was so honest, and that it's like, as much as Percy's character is innocent, but at the same time, even some of the choices he made are informed by what's happened to him in his life.
Totally.
So, I really liked that. I thought that was really refreshing and an interesting take on it.
And he's unredeeming at times, for sure. He does some things in the film that are tough, even though I think you love the kid.
Yeah.
Hard to shoot, hard to live with in an edit, but they had to be. I actually just want to say quickly, we were in Sudbury for Cinefest last week. We had a great opening at the Atlantic Film Festival. We've had Q&As every day.
Yeah.
This is by far the best conversation I've had about the film, and honestly, just getting to talk about it with people who honestly tell you they hate your ending, I love it. Honestly, thank you. It's so refreshing to talk about a piece of work that you put your life into this candidly. So thank you guys very much for coming, and thank you for asking those questions. Really, thank you so much.